Maybe you haven't noticed this, but film comedies are not big box office anymore. That's really not what people are going to see at movie theaters. In the 1980s, though, film comedies were everything. And there were a group of writers, performers, directors who were creating things like Ghostbusters, Blues Brothers, Animal House. You notice they're like guys doing all this stuff, and that is indeed part of the equation here. But these were big box office movies. Many of them came from Saturday Night Live. Some of them came from its Canadian counterpart. We're going to talk about all that today with somebody who has looked very carefully at this period of movie making. We're also going to include in our conversation two comedians, because who knows more about comedy than they do. So get ready for a trip through those classic 1980s comedies after the news.
You know you make me wanna kick my heels up and throw my hands up and throw my head back and come on now. Don't forget to say you will. Don't forget to say yeah.
All right, of course, that is from the Blues Brothers. We're going to have a conversation today about 1980s comedies, although we're not going to pin ourselves, quite so sadistically to just one set of years. I mean, there's going to be some late 70s films and maybe some early 90s films that kind of define this period. But what defines this period is Animal House, Meatballs, the Blues Brothers, Caddyshack, Stripes, Ghostbusters, a whole bunch of other movies, and the work of certain creators, the work of certain performers. It was a time in which comedies were popular entertainment in a way that maybe they aren't even now in movie theaters. They were a time when comedies attracted huge audiences and big box office numbers. So let me tell you a little bit more about who's here with us to do that. Nick Semlyen. Nick Semlyen. Did I do that right, Nick? Was that a good pronunciation?
You did that fantastically.
All right.
I'm very impressed.
All right. Nick Semlyen is features editor for Esquire magazine, author of Wild and Crazy Guys, How the Comedy Mavericks of the 80s Changed Hollywood Forever. Carolyn Paine is a stand-up comedian, actress, a dancer, and a regular appearer on this show, where mostly she complains about the movies that we make her see and talk about. So this I feel like the debt is paid in full after today's show, because these are movies you actually want to talk about. And Dan Kalwhite is a stand-up comedian based in New Haven, and Dan will perform at the Twisted Vine in Derby tomorrow night, July 12th. Be there at the Twisted Vine. All right, so Nick, I'm going to have you kind of set up this idea here. I mean, in your book, you are making the case, I think, for this period of time, this group of performers and creators as, if not the apex of American film comedy, something close, right? Something special. Go ahead and make that case.
Yeah, I just think these guys were kind of incredible. They were one-offs, and the fact that they all kind of came together was kind of amazing. I'm not sure that's happened before. Just all of these very big, larger-than-life characters, Bill Murray, Eddie Murphy, Dan Aykroyd, Chevy Chase, all of them very different to each other, but big characters. And yeah, they produced event movies, stuff like Ghostbusters, Blues Brothers, Caddyshack, just things which really kind of captured people's imaginations, and they were all kind of original, and they were all different to each other. And I think it is an amazing kind of period of comedy for sure.
It seems to me that I was thinking about this a couple of hours ago and thinking that in a way, one of the things that distinguishes this period is what flows into American comedy. I think there's two big things that flow into American comedy, and they're both kind of odd. One of them is Canada. And the other one is Harvard. That there was this incredible generation of, first of all, Canadian writers and performers who came up through Second City type companies in Canada, guided by Lorne Michaels, and then you also had this group of guys who'd worked on the Harvard Lampoon and had transferred those talents pretty seamlessly from there to American television and American film. So, and Nick, as you think back in comedy, the Marx Brothers didn't go to college. Ben Hecht went to college for 3 days. George S. Kaufman never went to college. One of the ways this period begins, it begins kind of with Animal House, which takes place at a college, pretty clearly not Harvard and not the period of time where these writers and performers went to college, but it's about it's the declaration of war of the slobs versus the snobs, which is going to become a big motif in this period. I would assume you would agree with that, Nick.
Yeah, I mean, I start the book with Animal House. I think it kicked off everything. And there were so many films that I think only exist because of Animal House. You know, Stripes, Caddyshack. They all kind of do that slobs versus snobs kind of dynamic. But it was huge. It was like a huge, huge hit. You know, it was the guys from Harvard, but they were making this incredibly anarchic film that just made college look like kind of a war zone with all the craziness that was going on. So, you know, it definitely set the pace and the tone for that whole kind of decade of anarchic kind of rebellious humor. And then Canada, yeah, definitely. You know, the SCTV guys were up in Toronto and Edmonton, like John Candy and Rick Moranis, Martin Short. All those guys were doing sort of stuff akin to what Saturday Night Live was doing, but a bit more polite, maybe.
Yes, because they're Canadian. So so I want to go to the comedians I have here in the studio. All right, Carolyn, this is it. We're actually talking about movies that you like. So what does this period in comedy mean to you? I mean, you're going to probably embrace a slightly different set of movies than maybe some of the guys on the show are going to embrace. But what's the period like for you?
So I mean, I was a pretty little kid in the 80s, but was for some reason allowed to watch these movies as like, a 6-7-year-old. So these movies really raised me and influenced me and became a part of who I was. I mean, to this day, I will tell you that Ghostbusters is one of my favorite movies. If not number one, definitely like top 3. And I also want to throw in, as a woman, I feel like there are a lot of great female comedians in this era, and movies 9 to 5, Big Business. I really feel like those ones were huge for me in that not only do they have that, you know, I mean, I was a kid. I didn't really understand what like feminism was, but I understood that like these were women getting it done, and also just these female comedians that were keeping up with men and carrying movies, whereas like Ghostbusters and Animal House and you know all of these other movies like that are Blues Brothers. They're male carried and by great comedians. But
yeah, and we're going to circle back to the sexual politics and the changes in political correctness that have ensued since the 1980s. But Dan, what about you? These just talking to you before we went on the air, I could see that your scholarship about these movies has kept up. You're still watching these movies.
Oh, I mean, totally. So I mean, when we were going back and forth on email, we were talking about our love of Ghostbusters. And I mean, I watched it every day when I got home from kindergarten on videotape. Every day, I swear to God. And it's like, and you talk about, I mean, I IMDb tons of things, so I know so much about Ghostbusters. Like, it was written by Dan Aykroyd and Belushi, and it was supposed to be Ghostbusters in outer space.
Yeah.
So how wild would that have been? And they're just like, no, Ivan Reitman was like, no, we can't be ghostbusting in outer space. That's absolutely ridiculous. But like any of those things, and Bill Murray is basically everything my persona is Bill Murray. Like just that lovable jerk. Like everyone, he's a slacker, and everyone just wants to kind of be him, and it always works out for him. Like Stripes, I saw Stripes at an age. I mean, I had to cover my eyes. My dad would say, "Cover your eyes." You know what I mean? Like the scene when they go in the mud wrestling pit or whatever. See,
my parents would let me watch it, but then be like, "Don't talk about this at school. Do not. This is not okay for you to be." They made it clear that I shouldn't have been seeing it, but
yeah, no, but I mean, yeah, it's everything to me. I absolutely love these movies.
Yeah, Bill Murray. I think as a young kid, and even now, I would cite him as just this huge, like a huge person of influence, and the way he is on screen, the way he's like the anti-hero. Like you should not like him at all. He is a total jerk. He's like lazy. He's kind of like slovenly in his appearance, and you know, he just talks with such snark. and in this like sing-songy voice that's
Yes.
like mocking.
Right.
Yes.
All right, so we're going to get to him. I want to circle back to Animal House for a second. Let's hear, in fact, a clip from Animal House. You're going to hear some voices familiar to you, including Tim Matheson as Eric Stratter and Peter Riegert as Donald Shainstein. I think his name was John Belushi as, of course, John Blutarsky and some other people. I think they're getting chewed out here, maybe by the dean. So here's a little bit of Animal House.
You clowns have been on double secret probation since the beginning of this semester.
Double secret probation?
And that means one more slip up, one more mistake, and this fraternity of yours has had it at Faber.
Well, that was pleasant. Nice of him to stop by, don't you think?
We've got to do something. He's serious this time. I think he knows about the exams.
He's right.
You're right. We got to do something.
Absolutely.
You know what we got to do? Toga party.
We're on double secret probation, whatever that is. We can't afford to have a toga party.
You guys up for a toga party?
Toga! Toga!
Yeah, I think they like the idea, Hoove.
Oh, Otter, please don't do this.
I got news for you, pal. They're gonna nail us no matter what we do. So we might as well have a good time. Toga, 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 toga,
So, Nick, one of the things we see here, as we said before, declaration of war between the slobs and the snobs. Although, to tell you the truth, Tim Matheson and Peter Riegert, they probably could have slid into one of the snobbier fraternities. And that's a little bit of the joke here, right? You've got Harvard guys writing stuff about what it's like to be counterculturists when they, in fact, have been through one of the, great imprinting factories of the ruling class in America. But I think the other thing that you see here, and it's maybe kind of a rejection of the late 60s and early 70s value, you see rebellion for rebellion's sake, right? These people want to displace the ruling class, not because they have anything better to offer. In fact, they would prefer to offer something worse and more chaotic. I don't react to that, Nick.
Yeah, I mean, not to get too into the social commentary, but obviously the 70s was Watergate, it was Vietnam, there was all this kind of stuff going on. And Animal House comes along in 1978, and it's just this blast of kind of fun and anarchy and kind of cocking a snoot at the system and authority, which you actually see like all the way through these films like Ghostbusters, Caddyshack. They're all doing the same thing. And so I think the fact it came along at the end of the 70s and was really subversive was like a big part of why it was kind of so massive and hit so big at that point.
Right. So I want to sort of shift from there. I feel as though, so you've got this sort of Saturday Night Live group, and you've got this SCTV kind of Canadian group. And then you've got a couple of other people who are kind of outliers, I think. Maybe the biggest outlier of all, though, is Steve Martin. Steve Martin, this guy, Jonathan.
I am not a bum. I'm a jerk. I once had wealth, power, and the love of a beautiful woman. Now, I only have two things. My friends and my thermos. Huh? My story? Okay. It was never easy for me. I was born a poor black child.
So I'm going to go over to the comedians first here. Once again, this is your childhood. But I would imagine, I have a hard time. I'm going to explore with you later how you were processing Ghostbusters as children. But it seems to me Steve Martin, Carolyn, is a great on-ramp because he really is functioning in a lot of different levels, including a lot of things that kids would probably get. Happy Feet and balloon animals and stuff like that.
Yeah. I mean, I think that I was an odd child in some ways who had sort of I sort of had like more advanced taste. And our family had a tradition on Thanksgiving. We always watched Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. So Steve Martin, if you say Steve Martin, that is like what pops into my mind. Like him just going off on John Candy in a hotel room. And Steve.
Those aren't pillows.
Yeah. Chatty Cathy doll. Like, he just is, to me, Steve Martin is one of those people who, some comedians are at their best where they're reacting to those around them.
Mm-hmm.
And then some comedians are at their best where they're like the instigator, they're crazy and being unhinged. And Steve Martin is one of those people who can do both and almost simultaneously, which is sort of what he does in like in The Jerk and in Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. And he's so. I also think another one like Little Shop of Horrors.
Oh yeah.
So I mean that movie is just terrific. And Steve Martin singing the "You'll Be a Dentist" song in that. I mean that. I remember as a kid being like, wow, I can't believe this is the same guy. Because of how, he just, to me, is one of those people who sort of has a broad skill set in a lot of ways, and how he approaches roles and how he approaches comedy. Like he's in a different. I agree that he's sort of in a different category for me.
I mean, my two favorite Steve Martins are Three Amigos.
Okay,
which
yeah,
I can
definitely.
recite so many lines from that movie, and then My Blue Heaven, if you've ever seen that one before. So it was based upon, what's it called? Henry Hill. So there's two books that were written. So who was, I can't think of My Blue Heaven, the writer. She was the wife of the guy that wrote Goodfellas. So
Nicholas Plague.
Yes. So it's Steve Martin.
Nora Ephron being the wife.
Yes. So, I mean, and that has so many incredible lines. And once again, that's Rick Moranis is in that. He's the FBI agent that's kind of trying to rein in Steve Martin. But I mean...
How have I never seen this?
Oh, are you kidding me? I think it's like 1993 or so.
I know what my weekend plans are.
Yeah, there you go.
So Nick...
Steve Martin's also got dark hair in that one. It's like one of the rare Steve Martin's black
and a
hair.
flat top.
So I remember the
Still
first time I saw Steve Martin. Steve Martin had been a writer on the Smothers Brothers comedy series. On their last episode, as they were being canceled, they brought out all the writers. And the last person they brought out, they said, there's this guy in the writer's room. His name is Steve Martin. We don't know who he is or who hired him. And he came out and he did some of this stuff that really became a lot of his early signature, Nick. And so Martin in his early days is a Dadaist, right? He's messing around with the actual forms of comedy. He's doing stuff that kind of assault your expectations about comedy. He's doing stuff that is constantly running its thumb down the knife edge between stupid and unbelievably smart. And in a way, I think he's kind of different from a lot of the people he winds up collaborating with. He's also reverential about the past, right? This is a guy who he almost has Woody Allen's nostalgia for 30s and 40s. He winds up trying to make these kind of Howard Hawks type screwball comedies, All of Me, Dead Men Don't Wear Plaid, things like that. So, I mean, Nick, in a way, I see Steve Martin as kind of sui generis, kind of a guy who's connected. He's connected to, he's a genuine intellectual about philosophy and modern art. This is a guy, he kind of doesn't really fit the slob comedy motif exactly.
No, definitely. I mean, he was doing his own thing. I think Rick Moranis coined the phrase anti-comedy for what he was doing, because he was kind of poking fun at what, he was trying to, he was really interested in philosophy. He almost kind of, I think he majored in philosophy, and then he was trying to subvert jokes and break them down and do really interesting kind of intellectual things, but at the same time was really funny physically and could do juggling and rope tricks and stuff. And I think he's like the true Renaissance man out of the pack. Like, he could do anything. I love Dead Men Don't Wear Plaid. It's such a weird kind of experimental film where it's like him catapulted into a load of old classic noir films, and it's hilarious but very strange.
During the marketing of Pennies from Heaven, I had like a lot of access to the people who were involved in this, not Steve Martin, but the people who were working on it. So Pennies from Heaven is kind of it was based on, I think, a British series by Dennis Potter, and it was a kind of a send up of 30s song and dance kind of movies. And Harold Ross, I think, was the director, and he directed a lot of Broadway musicals and stuff. And when he got Steve Martin. He assumed that Steve Martin knew how to dance because he'd seen Steve Martin do all this crazy stuff, with his body and dancing and stuff like that. And he said that after half an hour, he said to Steve Martin, "You've been faking all this. You've been able to pull this off with no training whatsoever. You don't know anything, do you?" And that's sort of like what Martin does again and again, right? Is he just exudes this kind of
do anything.
Yeah, he can do anything, and he will absolutely fool us every time. I just quickly want to mention a little weird subnote for me about Steve Martin, which is he was kind of obsessed with the Gong Show, and the Gong Show was also Dadaism. I think most people kind of didn't get that, but he was frequently a panelist he was one of the gongers on the Gong Show, and then occasionally he would try to infiltrate the acts. So every once in a while there'd be somebody hanging upside down playing a banjo, and it turned out to be Steve Martin, who was still pretending to try to win the Gong Show. So Nick, let's go to one of the other seminal movies that you talk about, and that is the Blues Brothers. Now, the Blues Brothers, also, once again, a very, very high-grossing movie, a movie whose fascination hasn't faded. But Nick, I don't know, give me your just general take on where that belongs in this pantheon.
Oh, very, very high. I mean, this is one of the films of the period that I love the most. I saw it when I was very young on a family holiday, and it kind of blew me away. And even then, I think I was like, what is this film? This is really unusual and strange. It's a blues kind of musical, but also an action film with this insane car chase, which I could watch endlessly. And it all came from Dan Aykroyd's brain. He went off and he'd never written a script before, and it was so massive. It was inside a phone book folder. And he threw it over the producer's fence. And it was just this bizarre kind of mix of things. And the studio, obviously, he and Belushi were so hot off of Saturday Night Live, the studio just kind of gave them the green light, and then didn't realize till halfway through the shoot that it was like 3 times over budget and gone off the rails. But somehow it's amazing. Like the final product kind of worked in a way that some of these films didn't.
Well, that notion of Aykroyd, I didn't know that until you wrote about it in your book, that the script is like 3 times the length of a normal screenplay and all. To me, this is one of the places where we can maybe point to another. We talked about Canada. We talked about Harvard. I think we have to talk about cocaine too. This is an era in which comedy writers used to drink or maybe smoke pot or something. They discovered this drug that at least creates the illusion of productivity. Right? You could do a lot of things, maybe too many things, while you're using cocaine. And Nick, I'm wondering if the Blues Brothers is in many respects an expression of that. It's like so much of everything is going on in this movie. So much energy is bursting out of there. I wonder if it would have been possible without stimulants.
I mean, it's definitely a more is more like comedy. Like, I don't think Aykroyd was doing quite as much. He said that actually cocaine was built into the budget for night shoots, so it was just kind of handed around. So everyone was kind of staying up and getting wired, and that was the time when Aykroyd would join in. But yeah, obviously Belushi was off his face most of the shoot, and they had to kind of shut down for a few days. But yeah, it's definitely just unrestrained. Like, there's no kind of understatement in the Blues Brothers.
Yeah. So, comedians in the studio. So, what is this, Dan? What's this movie to you? Is it one of your big ones?
Definitely. And also one of the things about the movie is the music. So, like, Dan Aykroyd has his own station on whatever it is, Sirius Satellite, whatever it is, and he plays old R&B and stuff like that. So, just absolutely incredible music that's like kind of driving this comedy as well. So, it's just a great. Everything works. I think it's like 100% on Rotten Tomatoes if you go back and you look at those different things or whatever it may be. And I know that shouldn't matter as a litmus test or whatever it is, but yeah, if you just think about some of the acts that they have that just are performing, like Muddy Waters is in there and all that other crazy stuff, and it's just like, yeah, it's absolutely fantastic. Firing on all cylinders, as I like to say.
Yeah, this movie it's just a lot. Like, it is a lot. You feel like you're doing cocaine watching this movie. Like, it's so much that by the time you're watching that car chase, and the music became like iconic. To me, it almost, like, if I think of blues music, it's really in the context of Blues Brothers. Like, it's not that, it sort of took on that genre for me musically. Yeah, I wouldn't rate this one as, like, this wouldn't make my top 5, shockingly, for this era of film, but I definitely have a respect for it and will sit and watch it, like, anytime it crosses my path.
Yeah.
All right, so Blues Brothers, I think the only movie that rates its own chapter in Nick's book, and we'll go out with a Blues Brothers tune. Everybody needs somebody to love.
Need somebody, everybody
So, you've been telling everybody I'm sleeping with you, huh?
No.
Well, that explains it. That's why these people treat me like some dime store floozy.
no,
They
it's
think
not.
I'm screwing the boss.
That's not it at all.
Oh, and you just love it, don't you? It gives you some sort of cheap thrill, like knocking over pencils and picking up
Now,
papers.
don't get excited.
Get your scummy hands off of me. Look, I've been straight with you from the first day I got here, and I put up with all your pinching and staring and chasing me around the desk because I need this job. But this is the last straw.
All right, now wait. Let's just sit down and.
Look, I got a gun out there in my purse. And up to now, I've been forgiving and forgetting because of the way I was brought up. But I'll tell you one thing. If you ever say another word about me or make another indecent proposal, I'm going to get that gun of mine, and I'm going to change you from a rooster to a hen with one shot. Don't think I can't do it.
Okay, we're talking about 80s comedies with Nick Semlyen. He is the features editor of Empire magazine and the author of Wild and Crazy Guys, How the Comedy Mavericks of the 80s Changed Hollywood Forever. Carolyn Paine is a stand-up comedian, actress, dancer, regular guest on this show. You all know her by now. And Daniel Kalwhite making his debut on this show, stand-up comedian based in New Haven. You can see him at the Twisted Vine in Derby tomorrow night, July 12th. So, Carolyn, I'm going to start with you because, you know, you're a girl, and I would argue, I mean, Nick's book is called Wild and Crazy Guys, and I would argue that the 80s are not really a great period for women's comedy, but maybe you would beg to differ.
I feel like it was a harder period for women's comedies. I think there were definitely less of them, but that doesn't mean that the ones that came out, as I mentioned earlier, I mean, we just heard that clip from 9 to 5. We have that. You have Big Business, Outrageous Fortune with Bette Midler and Shelley Long, and George Carlin is in that. I mean, but he takes a back seat to these women who are, you know, driving the car here in this. And I think that 9 to 5 is, I mean, and it's kind of a movie that like now sort of is getting this resurgence in the #MeToo era. Mm-hmm. And it's a movie that really stands up. Like some of these other movies are very funny, but they almost have this like very 80s period specific quality to them. 9 to 5, I think, is unique because it stays, it's current. And also, I mean, it's just brilliant. I think Lily Tomlin as a comedian is, I would probably rank her as just like the most influential female comedian to me. And I think that 9 to 5 is just, it's so brilliant. I mean, and it's so smart. And if you're going to talk about female-driven comedy from this period, I think that movie really, really takes it.
Well, there's a way in which, the pipeline works a little bit differently here. If you think about some of the work, Nick, that is done in the 1980s that is good, it often does involve somebody like Lily Tomlin, who didn't come out of Saturday Night Live. She came out of Laugh-In. Or a movie like Private Benjamin that involves Goldie Hawn, who didn't come out of Saturday Night Live. She came out of Laugh-In. You really, like a decade or more before that the great talents of Saturday Night Live, the first core group, Jane Curtin, Lorraine Newman, Gilda Radner, for various reasons didn't have gigantic film careers. It's going to be a while before Saturday Night Live produces the kind of women. I mean, now they've done it where I think they've kind of taken over. But there's something going on in the 80s. I don't know exactly what it is, but there's a reason, Nick, that your book is called Wild and Crazy Guys, I think.
Yeah, I think definitely it was part of the culture. I was just reading a quote from Johnny Carson, who was talking about female comics and why he didn't like having them on his show in the 70s and saying they're a little too aggressive for my taste. And definitely people like John Belushi, Bill Murray to an extent, when they were on Saturday Night Live, didn't really kind of nurture an atmosphere where, the female comics were kind of at the forefront of it. So I think there was definitely some ingrained sexism. I think the real tragedy is kind of Gilda Radner. And I think, she's so funny on that show. She should have got the movie opportunities, better movie opportunities. She did make some films, but they're not particularly great. Her roles are not particularly great. So it was a tough time, I think, definitely for female comedians.
And Dan, there's also a way in which a lot of the things in this, I mean, look, we live in a much more sensitive, some would say hypersensitive era where comedians struggle to find a joke that they can tell that won't offend people. Part of the whole idea of the 80s was they were going to, these slob comedies, these anarchic, nihilistic, John Belushi type comedians, they were going to let everything hang out and weren't going to worry too much about who they offended.
Well, we're talking about 9 to 5, and unfortunately, it wasn't something I really gravitated towards as a child, or even revisited. So I was trying to think of something I could come back with, and Ruthless People. Have you ever seen that before? Ruthless People. I mean, Bette Midler in that, and it's one of the funniest things I've ever seen before. But that's a powerful woman. She gets kidnapped.
I think Bette Midler deserves. I think she really carried a lot of female comic roles in film throughout the 80s in a stellar way.
Yes.
I really agree. Ruthless People is a great one.
I mean, that's kind of where my comedy lies because it's so wild. You know what I mean? The thing with 9 to 5, and this is going to sound like it's set in an office, and I hate working in an office. So anything, it's just I don't want to. And I love Dabney Coleman. I think he's absolutely fantastic. I know
it's wild. They steal a body from a hospital.
I didn't know that. I haven't seen the movie.
Yeah, go back and give it a revisit.
So Nick, I mean, Animal House has a scene where Thomas Hulse's character has an angel and a devil kind of debating basically about whether he should ravish a defenseless woman. There are things from this era that are make you uncomfortable, right?
Oh, definitely. I mean, Animal House, when you go back and you rewatch that, there is tons of stuff. So there's that sort of date rape scene where obviously he doesn't end up doing it, but it's still pretty icky. There's the kind of topless pillow fight. There's all kinds of stuff. And you get that in Stripes and some of it in Caddyshack. So, yeah, I mean, the sexual politics of that era definitely has not necessarily dated very well. And you've got even sleazier films off the back, like Revenge of the Nerds has got some really tough stuff to watch these days.
All right, so the other thing I want to talk a little bit about here, there's one more person. We've got a few more people we need to introduce, but one major person we need to introduce. And one thing that I would say about Animal House and the Blues Brothers is these are movies about white college guys who have exalted, quite properly, black culture and black music very specifically and are very excited about it and see it as the most vital and exciting soundtrack for their own lives. But it is kind of about white guys curating this stuff as opposed, and obviously in the Blues Brothers an awful lot of black musicians make appearances and stuff, but all kind of we're kind of led up to this music taken by the hand by Aykroyd and Belushi because there isn't really the comedy star yet who can get us to this place on his own until this guy comes along. This is from Coming to America.
Listen, real Americans. Pound for pound, Sugar Ray Robinson, the greatest fighter ever lived. Oh, come on, man. What about Joe Louis?
The Brown Bomber. Now that was a great boxer.
You damn right. I suppose nobody in here ever heard of Cassius Clay. We got a point. Cassius Clay was a bad Hey, I ain't saying Clay ain't bad. I'm just saying I stopped liking Cassius Clay once he changed his name to Muhammad Ali. What kind of is that?
Wait a second. A man has the right to change his name to whatever he wants to change it to. And if a man wants to be called Muhammad Ali, God damn it, this is a free country. You should respect his wishes and call the man Muhammad Ali.
His mama named him Clay. I'm gonna call him Clay. Mm-hmm. That's right. I say Clay.
Get out of here.
That's right. That's right. He gonna always be Clay to me. I don't give a what he changed name to. He is Clay. He Clay to me. I say Clay.
Well, then you're a putz. The three of you. 3 putzes. You should change the name outside from Mighty Sharp to the 3 putzes.
All right, so we hear Eddie Murphy actually doing 3 of the voices in that clip. So, Nick, we have the arrival suddenly of this black comedy star whose talents are just prodigious. I mean, as you can hear, he can go in and out of just about any voice or idiom that you can imagine. He's fun to look at. He's fun to watch. And I was trying to think. I didn't have a lot of time to think about this. I mean, I think the other thing about Eddie Murphy is that, kind of like Cary Grant, he was plausibly a romantic lead in certain situations. He was an attractive enough, sexy enough guy to be able to pull that off, but but also could be in a total screwball situation, which is where he found himself more often. But there's, once again, a way in which, Nick, it seems to me Eddie Murphy stands out in this pack.
Oh, he's incredible. I mean, it was so much fun to write about his story because it's so unlikely. You know, he came out of nowhere and he was just determined to be famous and be rich and be massive, and he was. But they didn't want him to be on Saturday Night Live to begin with, and he almost got fired from 48 Hours. But, you know, he was so determined that he just made it happen. And yeah, incredibly talented. And Coming to America is such a great showcase for him because not only is he doing kind of multiple characters for the first time, but the main character, Prince Hakeem, that he plays is really untypical of Eddie Murphy. He's this really kind of innocent, naive guy. And I think he's brilliant in that film. But,
right.
Yeah.
And
great.
We should say that, yeah, it wasn't as though Hollywood or Saturday Night Live or anybody opened its arms to this guy under consideration for the role of Axel Foley in 48 Hours. Before him, Mickey Rourke, Al Pacino, Dennis Quaid, James Caan, Jack Nicholson. So you've got, this movie, Nick, with this classic line, I'm your worst nightmare, a black man with a badge, or however that thing goes, which could not be said by any of those people, obviously. I mean, he's not anybody's first choice, but he turns this movie into something it could never have been.
Yeah, and against all the odds, like they wanted to fire him. They didn't think he was particularly good. It was his first time performing in a film. He had only done stand-up before, and everyone thought he was a little bit shaky. He wasn't that good in that many takes. And then he had this big kind of set piece inside the club where he had to go in and deliver that monologue, and it's really edgy material. And he just improvised that line that you said, and he was just electric. And I spoke to the director, Walter Hill, and he said when he was performing that scene, he turned to the producer and said, "We're going to be rich," because they just saw like, this is crazy how good he is.
Right. So, Carolyn, it's interesting. That movie was the #1 movie of the year that year, Ghostbusters being number 2. Once again, we're at a time where comedy movies are big box office in a way that they are not now. And yeah, I don't know. Well, I'm going to let both of you guys riff a little bit on Eddie Murphy, but if you want to start.
I mean, I kind of wish I had been old enough to be experiencing these in that like box office, in that kind of in the thrill that it would have been to have this be like a social phenomena. I mean, again, like in 1988, I was real little, and we're talking about like a first grader or something, like stumbling through. But I saw this movie. I think I saw it on like VHS, and Eddie Murphy like blew me away in this movie, and everything he does. It's vocally to me, he is one of those people who is like a standout. I equate him in my mind with with like a Robin Williams.
Right. He's not as manic, I don't think.
No. I mean, like, Robin Williams minus
right, the manic persona.
Minus the manic, taking that down. But in his ability to kind of create these voices and the physical comedy. But like Colin said, I mean, there was something appealing about Eddie Murphy. Even as like a young kid, I can remember like looking and being like, all right, yeah, Eddie Murphy. Like,
see, HBO did, like, I didn't see these in the theater. Like, I was too young to see them in the theater. So like HBO made these things part of my life. So like Coming to America, Trading Places, The Golden Child. Have you ever seen that one before?
Yes.
He goes to Nepal and he's got to get the dagger of Ashanti or whatever it is. But it's just, he's so incredible because he's an action star as well.
Yeah.
There's so many things that he can do, and he's so funny. Coming to America, and then Trading Places, of course, is the Dan Aykroyd crossover, where and he's so good in that. And then they even kind of allude to Trading Places in Coming to America, where they see Mortimer and the other brother, and he gives him all the money or whatever it is, and it was just like, he's like, Mortimer, we're back.
I would also add a movie that I'm always surprised how many people have not seen this movie, but talk about the two of the people that we were talking about crossing over. It comes later, but Bowfinger is an amazing movie. And this is Steve Martin and Eddie Murphy combining in. I really do think it's one of the funniest movies that I've ever seen. But we're going to run out of time if we don't get moving here. So let's come to the one everybody wants to talk about. I actually do think if there's a movie that defines 1980s comedy, and we've already mentioned it a dozen times on the show, but here it is.
Are you troubled by strange noises in the middle of the night?
Do you experience feelings of dread in your basement or attic?
Have you or any of your family ever seen a spook, specter, or ghost? If the answer is yes, then don't wait another minute. Pick up your phone and call the professionals. Go Ghostbusters! Our courteous and efficient staff is on call 24 hours a day to serve all your supernatural elimination needs.
We're ready to believe
So, Nick, I don't know. There's a way for me in which Ghostbusters epitomizes a lot of the things that we've been talking about, especially this notion that a bunch of guys who, on the surface of things, are kind of unprepossessing losers, have ultimately the right answer. And they're the only ones who have the right answer. Ghostbusters, which comes in 1984, is probably by that time, there is a chance to react a little bit to the Reagan administration and what its version of authority is. And it's such a rejection of authority. I always come back to the moment where they're in the New York mayor's office and the cardinal comes in and the mayor kisses the cardinal's ring, and there's this incredible sort of mutual butt sniffing that's going on among these people who really don't have any ability whatsoever to affect the outcome of this terrible situation. And who does? This bunch of idiots. I mean, to me, Nick, this is kind of the moment where they really make their case for themselves.
Yeah, I mean, I got to say that the guy from the EPA, the character Walter Peck, who Bill Murray says has no dick, he's kind of got a point. Like he's just trying to regulate these guys who have got unlicensed nuclear accelerators on their backs. They're kind of tampering in some pretty major forces. But yeah, it's an amazing film. It's a kind of a lightning striking kind of situation where I don't think anyone knew what it was going to become. Bill Murray hadn't read the script when he turned up. The cast kind of got thrown together a little bit. Yeah, I don't think anyone kind of expected it.
Right. And so, and Dan, I do think that we're seeing Murray. Murray is as close to Groucho Marx as he's probably going to get here. Vincent Canby at one point wrote about the fact that that Bill Murray had this incredible distance between himself and his characters sometimes, that, that it worked somehow comedically, that he clearly didn't believe in the characters or the situation. And that's sort of part of the humor there. There's a way in which he's making a joke about the movie he's in.
Very much so. And Carolyn was talking about it a bit before, just like kind of his sing-songy voice. And there's a scene in the movie where they just got fired. They get kicked off campus from the college. And he's talking to Dan Aykroyd, and they're freaking out about how they're going to live or whatever it is. And he says, call it luck, call it fate, call it karma. And he's like, what are we going to do? And he just goes, I don't know, Ray. I don't know. And it's just, I wanted to be him since I was 5 years old.
Right, but he's not somebody you should ever be emulating.
No.
In that movie or really in any way. But he is so cool.
Yes.
He was the cool one.
Yes.
For sure. If you were gonna aspire to be one of the Ghostbusters.
But if you think about Harold Ramis, that was my first time meeting him in a movie. So I always thought he was this gigantic nerd, right?
Yeah.
And then I see him in Stripes, and he's like, oh, he's incredible. He's just like Bill Murray. Yeah. You know what I mean? So for years, because I didn't see Stripes probably till I was a little bit older.
Same thing. I had the same reaction.
And it was like, he's not a gigantic nerd?
Yeah. Although Egon comes across as slightly less nerdy than your, quintessential nerd trope of Rick Moranis.
Right.
He's not only a nerd, but just a loser. Who,
Well, although I want to get to, that takes us to Rick Moranis, who's somebody that you deal with also in the book, Nick. And so this is a guy who, once again, comes out of that Canadian tradition. It's a little bit more gentle. It's a little more subtle, maybe not in Ghostbusters so much, but a little less obsessed with class and class resentment because Canada is a really kind of different place, So, he, John Candy, Martin Short, there's a way in which they are less likely to pull down everything in Pottery Barn than some of the American comedians we're talking about, right?
Definitely less anarchic. Yeah, they were doing their thing up in SCTV, and some of it was quite kind of highbrow, and they're sort of satirizing War and Peace and all kinds of stuff. But yeah, what Rick Moranis does in Ghostbusters is amazing. It was meant to be John Candy, kind of famously, John Candy turned it down, and Rick Moranis was parachuted in and just does this incredibly nerdy character who's obsessed with tax and accounting. And I love every moment of his in Ghostbusters. It's some of my favorite stuff.
When he's got the colander on his head, and he's reciting this Sumerian mythology, and there's this terrific moment where after it's all, at one point I think Annie Potts offers him a cup of coffee. He goes, do you want a cup of coffee? And he went, do I?
Have some.
Yes, have some.
Have some.
It's been with the horse as well.
The horse, I was just about to say, his interaction with that horse.
Yeah, I'd love to say it on air. That's one of my favorite parts of that movie.
Yeah. And I think that whole Canadian thing, which also brings us Dave Thomas and Catherine O'Hara, Andrea Martin, all these people. I think if we just had Belushi and Aykroyd just pulling down walls and smashing stuff and didn't have this other part of it, you wouldn't have the ethos that we're talking about right now. So let's go out of here with this particular break. We're going to be back with one more conversation here, but we should actually go out with Rick Moranis singing.
The smell first hits me from 5 blocks away. It's Friday and I can't stay away. The Blue Jays are playing, but I won't likely risk it. I'm here with a plan to binge on her brisket. My mother's brisket, so moist and tender.
Wherever we go with 3 brave amigos, and we'll be amigos forever. We are the 3 amigos. We are the 3 amigos.
All right, I'm not going to reintroduce the panel because we're going to run out of time if we do, but you should know that Nick de Semlyen, I could pronounce it at the beginning of the show, and now I'm getting tired, wrote The Wild and Crazy Guys, How the Comedy Mavericks of the 80s Changed Hollywood Forever. That's why we're having this conversation. That also includes Carolyn Paine and Daniel Kalwhite. So we're hearing 3 Amigos. So, Nick, by now it's 1986. And what's happening here is that 3 of these kind of seminal talents are getting together, but basically 2 that we haven't talked about, Martin Short and Chevy Chase. And Chevy Chase is kind of interesting, too. Just, right at the beginning, a foundational member of Saturday Night Live, but not exactly part of the same crowd as Aykroyd, Murray, Belushi. There's a way in which he's different, right?
Yeah, Chevy Chase had a very rough ride. Like, he started off as the biggest, certainly within this SNL kind of crowd. Steve Martin was already huge. But, he left Saturday Night Live before anyone else, and he went off and he was getting movie offers. He moved to Hollywood, and then he just picked really bad scripts and just had one flop after another. Obviously, Caddyshack was kind of became a cult hit, but he made a lot of bad decisions, made some really terrible films, Modern Problems and Oh Heavenly Dog. I don't know if you guys have seen that, but it's the one where Chevy Chase is inside the body of a dog.
How did
it's
that
as
lose?
good as it sounds.
Oh, man.
Well, there's, 3 Amigos is interesting, Dan, too, because, you've got 2 of the great archivists of this world, Martin Short and Steve Martin, both kind of in love with the past, very aware of comedy's past, cinema's past. This movie looks back to a kind of movie that's not being made. There's a great scene where Martin Short is talking to some baffled Mexican children and talking about how Dorothy Gish came up to him one time and told him he really had it, and there's a way in which this movie is a little bit more nostalgic than some of the craziness that we've talked about so far.
Yes, and there's so many great bits in this movie. There's the one scene where they get kicked off the lot in the movie company that they're working for, and they want to go back and get their clothes so they can move to Mexico. Mm-hmm. So it's Steve Martin standing on top of that wall, and he's trying to get their attention by pretending to be a bird. And so he's like making bird noises, but Chevy and Martin, I'm messing his name up, they're at the bottom of the wall. And he can't get them to do it, so he just starts going, look up here. Look up here. And they're just oblivious. And he finally goes, hey, guys. Hysterical. Absolutely fantastic.
Yeah. Is this an important movie for you, Carol?
Yeah, definitely. I don't think I would rank this in my top 5, but I'm a big, despite Chevy Chase kind of having a lot of failure, I'm a big Chevy Chase fan just for the National Lampoon's movies, the vacation movies. I think National Lampoon's Vacation and European Vacation are... Those movies have there are things in them that make me laugh so hard every time I watch them. And they've been replaying them a lot on TV recently, and I think that maybe what did help Chevy Chase be so brilliant in those was Beverly D'Angelo. Again, like I think like he really plays off of her so well. But he's interesting because he's so big. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
He's 6'4".
Right.
Yeah, he's massive.
Yeah. And it makes physical comedy is just not his his stride.
Well, he used to fall over all the time on Saturday Night Live. He was,
That's
when he was
right.
doing
Yeah, that
Gerald
was-
Ford.
Right.
So we're going to unfortunately have to wrap this up. We've kind of run out of time. I do want to say it's kind of interesting to me that Martin Short and Steve Martin are still touring together. They clearly are kindred spirits. They're also, I think, kind of the clean living guys. You don't get the feeling that they drank a lot or did a lot of cocaine or anything like that. They just sort of, they were there for the comedy, and they were both obviously huge comedy nerds. Well, this has been a lot of fun to talk about. Nick, thanks so much for doing this and for writing this book.
Oh, thanks for having me on. It's been a lot of fun. Thank you.
So the book, again, is Wild and Crazy Guys, How Comedy Mavericks of the 80s Changed Hollywood Forever. Carolyn Paine, a stand-up comedian, actress, dancer, regular guest on this show. Great to meet Dan Kalwhite, a stand-up comedian based in New Haven. He'll be at Twisted Vine in Derby on tomorrow night, July 12th. Be there. And thanks to, I never did the thank yous today, so the thank yous go especially to Jonathan McNichol, who produced this whole show and rounded up all these clips and figured out how we were going to have this very fun conversation. So thank you, Jonathan. And we're going to be back tomorrow with The Nose, and we're going to be talking about The Amazing Spider-Man and other stuff.
Watch out!